back to an obscure tour at the edge of the internet. I am your host, the Nameless Tour Guide, and today we'll be proving ourselves as a Knight of the Way of White and rescuing Reah of Thurlen from the catacombs. This means we'll be going over areas that have already been dissected, so I'll be using this time to add some general musings, putting back some content I cut from previous episodes for time, and also I've started playing Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin Edition, so I'm going to chat about what I've found so far and my thoughts on the sequels. So this episode is going to be a lot different from the other episodes. It's going to be more free-flowing and more of a podcast feel to it. There will be some discussions of rather vital elements here in the Undead Church before we set off. There will also be some important elements with the rescuing of Reah of Thurlen, and in the last section we'll be going over the mysteries of the Pendant. And if you don't know why the Pendant is important, don't worry, we'll discuss that when we get to it. It was just an element of the game that became a meme for a while. It was actually one of the first things I ever heard about Dark Souls. So in this free-flowing discussion there may be some new elements that will come up, but I'll probably revisit them later. So just in case the podcast idea doesn't sit well with you, you can check out those sections and come back for Sen's Fortress in the next installment. I'd like to start by congratulating you on reaching episode 31 of this obscure tour. You've braved a lot of strange assertions made by this nameless tour guide, and it's a credit to how smart, open-minded, and generally cool you are. And having reached this far, I can now probably tell you one of the most important and yet also bizarre elements of Dark Souls lore that I believe cannot be denied for the story to make any logical sense. This isn't like humanoid constructs, which can be explained away by just reading things differently. The element we are about to discuss is core to everything you have seen so far and what you are seeing right now. And this concept is summed up simply and beautifully in the ambiguous image embedded in the Great Club. This club is found in Blighttown, protected by the half-giants, and is made from the branch of one of the great stone arch trees of Lordran. Now, if we look from above, there is a kneecap at the top. This is a leg of a giant. And then if we look at the handle, it is a hoof, a symbol of an animal, a sheep, a cow, a bull, or a goat. This design is connecting the giants to the symbol of the goats behind us. Though this is not all that we are seeing. In the middle of the club, where it rests on the shoulder, is a second kneecap. The leg of a human is sandwiched between the other two. And here we have a very important aspect of Dark Souls lore, the metamorphosis of characters between races. I mentioned this quickly in the first episode about races when we first approached this relief. Just because you were born into one particular race, it does not mean you are stuck there. You are free to move between those races. We have already seen a result of this metamorphism. In the Darkroot Garden, where strange frog-like creatures attacked us, but underneath their giant frog-like heads were the bodies of humans. If you have played future installments of Dark Souls, this idea is a lot more apparent. In Dark Souls 2, strange warped beasts will drop swords and armor that they do not wield. This is because they were once human and were changed into the creatures that you see. In Dark Souls 3, humans will have bird wings burst from their back right in front of you. And we see that in the silver relief. All the races are visually attached to one another. The human becomes a smaller goat and then a larger goat as he surrenders his humanity and ascends. Notice how the knee of the human and the large goat are positioned the same. The line can be read a few ways. For me, it does not follow the line of progression like the others. Instead, it sits below, more like a pet, a trained creature to protect and guard the interests of the other races. But to look at the other possibility is interesting. Is the line just a human without humanity? This is possible as Velka devised a way to extract humanity from a creature as early as the era of Astora, and is a way to disregard the whole idea of humanoid constructs. But the Silver Knights exist in the Age of Ancients, before Velka is born, in quotation marks. Those Silver Knights are the Black Knights, and the Black Knights act like programmed constructs. But after the era of Astora, if I absorbed all the humanity out of a thing, whatever that thing happened to be, and left it with its soul, there is no difference between that thing that I had created and a construct. Now, if a construct found a sprite of humanity and placed it within their bosom, is it now human? Is Solare of Astora a human or a construct? suddenly now the difference between humans and constructs becomes meaningless. What does it matter at all whether you are or you aren't? You can be human and lose your humanity and become a construct. You can be a construct and obtain humanity and become a human. And this is the most important aspect of this concept, the lore of Dark Souls, the arbitrary nature of your physical vessel. And we have seen this from the very beginning of the game. There are three things that are core to the nature of existence in Lordran: humanity, the soul, and a shell to carry them in. Everything else in Lordran is optional, even the flame. The soul is the memory and life force. And if I did as Manus did in the Age of Ancients and place a soul into an empty vessel that I built, I would have a creature that will play out their memories, such as the tasks of a nameless soldier or the duty of a proud knight. But if I take that same soul and transplant it into yet another vessel, I would still have the same nameless soldier or a proud knight. The physical nature of the creature is irrelevant. If that creature found a piece of humanity lying about somewhere or was gifted it or found it on a defeated enemy, they would become human and suddenly are free to explore new possibilities beyond their previous programming. So putting this all together, just as I chose to be a Knight of the Way of White at the outset of the journey, by the end of the journey, my choices may lead me to be a pyromancer devoted to the Gravelord Nito. Race is an option. I started as a human, but who's to say I have to stay that way? I just have to find the means to change, to ascend. And now we can see that those dogs that served the Capra demon in the basement were not just metaphors for the soldiers of Lordran. They are the remains of the soldiers of Lordran. They have been physically changed into mad dogs after years of loyal service to their gods. Are these changes an ascension or a descension, or simply a physical cementing of a being's already defined nature? Well, that is up to you to decide as you take in Velka's story. Again, this idea becomes clearer in future games, where in Dark Souls 2 an arbitrary interaction will change your gender without as much as a confirmation prompt. Or in Dark Souls 3, where you can decide to be reborn into whatever arbitrary shell you wish. It is completely unimportant. And you can do the same in Dark Souls 1. Simply start a new game. Now that might seem like a bit of a stretch, but you're in episode 31, so I know you're smart, open-minded, and cool enough to handle the next 30. Now since we mentioned it quickly, let's go over how Manus created his humanoid constructs and how it fits into the lore. In the Age of Ancients, there is the first flame, and we know from the opening cutscene this flame contained 4 souls of lords. But more than 4 creatures are present in that scene. The flame brings a large number of beings towards it. These creatures already had souls. They don't have to be human or anything else. They simply need to be a vessel with a soul within them. These things could be a mile high or tiny things. It doesn't matter at all. But what is important is the fact that there was a race before the first flame in the dark, whoever and whatever they were, waiting for a fire. This is the race we discussed quickly in the catacombs with Velka's books. And so when Manus needed to make an army for his lord Gwyn, he found the discarded souls of nameless soldiers and proud knights and placed them into the silver knight vessels that he built, just as we are finding the souls now at supposedly the end of the world. Manus built an army that had already existed by taking the abandoned souls and finding them a new vessel, a new home. Nameless soldiers who were as good as dead were reborn in a new era, the era that Dark Souls takes place in. So those Black Knights we have encountered on our journey have seen more than just the rise and fall of Gwyn and the other lords. They have seen it all happen before. And what happens if one of those proud knights acquires humanity? Well, that creature would be shouldered with a terrible burden that will require a will of steel to survive. No longer is it their place just to serve the whims of lords caught up in their own egotistical war against the dragons, but are now an active participant in the horrors of Lordran, horrors that they have already seen play out before, and so become desperate as their humanity demands that they find new and better ways forward for the world. And now leaving that idea, let's talk to Petrus, who has abandoned Reah of Tharaland in the catacombs.
Oh, you again? Me? I've become separated from my lady. I've scoured near and far, but no sight of her. Where could she have gone? Milady, to think I swore to protect you with my life. Your Highness, where have you gone? I am entirely to blame for this. Oh, woe is me. I am unworthy, deathly so. Oh, I'm sorry. Miracles, was it? Sometimes I lose myself. Pay me no mind.
Unfortunately, Petrus is broken for this playthrough. This is because Knight Lordran has already left us to do his work above, and only he can warn us about this monstrous cleric and reveal his true nature. I know what you're thinking. I miss Knight Lordran too. Without his protection, the Firekeeper was brutally murdered, and now without his guidance, Petrus may get away with his crimes. But luckily, time flows strangely in Lordran, and we can pull Knight Lordran's advice from another place and time. If we approach Knight Lordran after Petrus has returned from the catacombs, the knight will ask us if we want to purchase a tip for a small price. If you pay for the tip, he will say the following. This dialogue tells us what has happened to Reah, but the last sentence is the most important. Knight Lordran calls her a nubile cleric. Nubile meaning sexually attractive, like the daughters of chaos. He also tells us she is replete with humanity, like Manny de Mildred. Reah of Tharalan is an extension of the era of the perpetual war with the daughters of chaos, a prize to be won, and also the traditions of the beautiful butchers of Astora that came after. Who is Reah of Tharalan? She is the remedy, the martyr who bears the curse of the people of Tharalan. She is one of the valiant fathers who holds up the others at the end of the world. She has a mission to contain and control the poison of existence, humanity, as it threatens to devour her kingdom whole. And while we are heading back through the graveyard, recall this graffiti over Gwyn's boundary marker. Urzu and Ophelia, the bull inherits the dominion of Gwyn. Returning to the dialogue, after we get the warning from Knight Lordran, Petrus will change his tune and say the following. Petrus has caused an absolute mess, which we will discuss in more detail later. But for now, let's just say he needed to get Reah below, but he fled in terror before he was able to complete his own mission. And now he needs someone to correct the situation caused by his cowardice. Petrus is the kindly mother in this situation, the giver of life, the one who watches as another shoulders the burden and gives a reason to go on. Vince and Nico are naive children who do not know what is happening but are pulled along without choice. They need stamina to endure the horrors of their journey. The path is set by their father, a path they will have to one day walk, and if this realization becomes too much for them, they become hollow. Why are the genders swapped in this set of symbols? It is because the ideas of mothers, fathers, children, they are all masks hiding a deeper truth of Lordran. The inhabitants of Lordran are all just a gathering of humanity, souls, and a vessel to hold them in. The rest are just ideas meant to give order to the chaos of the cycle. This is why in Dark Souls 2 the equivalent to the Mask of the Father in this game is called the Penal Mask and is worn by a lost sinner, a woman who bears the burden of her own failings, but also the world's failings, as she has taken them on in an act of atonement. Strangely though, the lost sinner wields a sword whose true nature is unknowable. It's always surprising what pieces of information are completely unknowable in the Dark Souls universe. And that's a perfect segue into discussing the sequels. So that's all the new lore content for now. At the end of this part, we will be rescuing Reah of Tharalan. I'll put a timecode in the description if you want to skip to the next section, and the pendant will be dealt with in part 3. So let's discuss the sequels, Dark Souls 2 and 3. And answer a burning question I'm sure you all have is, why did you call this thing Aldia Tours when you're focusing on the first game? Well, there are two answers to that question. The first one is, I'm not very good at naming things. I just picked the name Aldia because he was a scholar and I thought it was funny for him to be running a Lordran tour company in his retirement. But when I got my first comment about Dark Souls 2, I immediately realized my mistake. But as this episode is a testament to when I decide to do something dumb in the moment, I tend to stick to it. This tour is kind of that as well, as I was playing a very empty Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition one day and went, I should jump into the remastered edition and also do a YouTube series about the lore stuff, just in case anyone who was brought in by the Switch version was on the hunt for some answers. And then 6 months later, here I am, rescuing Reah of Thurland. This was a lot more work than I was expecting it to be. The second answer is, and I can tell you this because we are in episode 31, is this is secretly a Dark Souls 2 tour. If I told you that in episode 4, which I was going to do, I don't think people would have believed me. Honestly, I was worried about putting the Menace stuff so early. But it's really hard to tell the story of Dark Souls without Menace. Dark Souls 2 is a prequel sequel. Everything that is behind the scenes of Dark Souls 1 is the basis of Dark Souls 2. There are no new events in that game. There may be more detail, but the events we are discussing here in this tour are all in Dark Souls 2. I still have open questions about Dark Souls 2, though I have open questions about Dark Souls 1. But of this idea I'm pretty sure. Dark Souls 3, by comparison, is the next chapter in the story of Lordran. It has new events and characters. So I am on shakier ground with Dark Souls 3, as there are important callbacks to the ideas laid down in the first game, but what is the story of the Consumed King? I have thoughts, I have ideas on what to look for, but honestly it could be a bunch of things. When I pull things from future games, I'm grabbing the low-hanging fruit as I run past. Stuff that I feel pretty confident about, but there are other things that I won't touch with a 10-foot pole. Because Dark Souls lore can be a little tricky to figure out and I don't want to add to the noise. Though in the comments of the video, Johann Burgermeister has been luring me into some discussions, so just remember all the stuff I say below about the future games is me freewheeling about things that are likely very, very wrong. So in the spirit of chatting about things in the sequels that I'm confident about, let's talk about the Scholar of the First Sin early game. As we've already covered most of it in this tour, and if you're a fan of Dark Souls 2, you can take the same techniques and get ahead of the tour, which Johann Burgermeister has been doing below, which is really cool, because this is an amazing rush, this form of storytelling. It's as satisfying as defeating even the most challenging boss in this game. When you put it all together and things just start to fall out and make this weird, wonderful sort of sense all of a sudden. Though before I do that, I should mention that before I started playing the Scholar of the First Sin edition about a week ago, I've only ever played Dark Souls 2 the original, and the editions are very different. The developers have gone through and edited their piece for clarity. And this happens a lot in all creative endeavors. Content gets moved and dropped, and with Dark Souls 2, it just happened to occur after the game was released. And on from that, you may be wondering if I know about the Dark Souls 1 cut content, and I absolutely do, and I find it fascinating. I love learning about how things are made and constructed, so I find all that type of content and messing around in debug mode really cool. But content is cut for a reason, and this happens in every creative endeavor. Sometimes people are just trying out ideas that don't meet the standard that they want. Sometimes focuses change. Sometimes lore gets rewritten, and sometimes there are just mistakes where you lose sight of the continuity of your story. Though when it comes to the lore, I try to stick to the elements that are in the game, as I don't know why the other elements were left out, though I do use outside influences as a general guide. Returning to Dark Souls 2, the art assets are all the same, I believe, but as we have seen with the areas like the Undead Berg, that doesn't mean there isn't new detail. The changes in the new monster distributions in the Scholar of the First Sin edition is an attempt to make the story clearer. What that means is the stuff that wasn't changed was deemed to be exactly what was wanted by the new team or the old team revisiting it with more time. So by comparing the two editions, you get more information about intent. Just like I have found in the remastered edition here, but this actually went further and added new art with the Gargoyle Scream. New art is the biggest deal in game development, and the fact that the team bothered to make the change is huge. This is the same with the Warrior Round Shield, though I personally would not have made the change, but hey, I'm just a Nameless Tour guide. The change of the shield is an attempt to push Priscilla into the fore. The shield looks like the icon of the Tearstone rings. The red Tearstone ring is a favourite with speedrunners. Maybe someone will see it and make a connection. But it messes up the scimitar and the falchion symbols that are an important symbol of Velka and Priscilla before they were gods. Those weapons become the rapier and the halberd afterwards. The scimitar is the weapon wielded by the skeletons with the shield, and the falchion are the skeletons without, the mother and the daughter. Though on the other side of that, the gargoyles use a shield of the moon, representing Priscilla's protection. I can see an argument that the warrior's shield is the same, but the loss of the colours means that Velka's identity becomes blurred, so I'm torn on this change. It's not like another change that I have noticed but have not mentioned yet. Frankly, I'm mad about it. When I saw it, I actually swore in shock. I understand it, but that doesn't make it right. I've become as angry as people learning about the secrets of the Pendant. I'll have to control myself. Hopefully by the time we get around to covering this change, my fury will have subsided. And so now, leaving the podcasty type section of this episode, we'll return after we've rescued Reah to that. We are now entering the light-devouring realm of Nito, the Tomb of the Giants. And below us here is an abandoned campsite of the Pilgrims from the Way of White. This is a pilgrimage that occurs regularly. There is always more dark that must be cured, and every time a valiant father must carry the burden below. And we are fighting a giant skeleton, still smaller than the one we saw opening the way to Sen's fortress, and yet bigger than the half-giants of Blighttown. We are seeing a progression through time. And here we have a strange crushed dog figure, pinned to the ground like the egg bearers of the Chaos Flame. Notice also that the coffins that we are encountering are all of different sizes. This is a reinforcement of the idea that the giants actually change over time, slowly becoming bigger. Another dog figure, but something is inside it this time. The large soul of a proud knight. This dog thing is a knight. Was it always a giant? Or did the soul become so large it changed its physical appearance? Well, it is a dog, something we don't expect to be a knight. If a creature can morph from a humanoid to a dog, why not a giant? The vessel is just a mask that can change over time. And now as we drop into the dark and try not to get ambushed by aggro skeletons, notice the walls of this domain. It is sludgy and black. As I hold my lantern, which emits a white light, the wall illuminates at spots with a dim blue light. These walls are reacting to the flame. The walls are made of pure dark, pure humanity. This is what the half-giants of Blighttown are made of. This is what Framp the Kingseeker is made of. And all of it responds to the presence of the flame. And here we have Trusty Patches, but before we meet him again, let's go and rest at the bonfire. From another time and place, Night Lord Shrek warned us about Patches, so we should be pretty careful. Notice again that next to the bonfire is the remains of one of these giant dogs.
What, you again? Well, well, you've been a stranger. Good to see you well, mate. All right. You came at the perfect time. There's a fine stash of treasure right down that hole. I found it first, but we're friends now. I'll split it with you, in any case. Have a look. It'll shimmer you blind. There, that hole. Take a closer look.
And after that menacing laugh, I think it's a good idea we use the Rite of Kindling to increase the bonfire down here to its maximum level and get 20 Estus flasks. As a reminder, Trusty Patches is a symbol of Nito. Before he tried to trick us by plunging us into the dark when we least expected it. And in compensation he gave us humanity, a connection to this physical realm of Lordran. Symbolically, if we don't surrender to Nito's dark, then go ahead and see the rest of Lordran. This sprite will help you, but when you don't find the answers out there, there is always the catacombs to return to. Less symbolically, this was a backhanded compliment. Trusty Patches believes us to be grave robbers, so here's something to sate us. the remains of the dead. But there is something worse than grave robbers in this world, and that is clerics like Reah of Tharaland.
This is what I do, my friend. The trinkets I'll be stripping off your corpse, that's the real treasure.
I knew that would happen. Knight Lordran never steers us wrong. Now we have 2 proud knights and a skull lantern of the necromancers, and that is here because the Knights of the Way of White were once allied with Nito. When we went to fight Pinwheel the Necromancer, who stole the power of the Gravelord, we were helped by Paladin Leroy, who was not just a knight, but a Paladin of the Way of White, and note that Leroy is the only character to have that title.
You're no hollow, are you? Thank goodness. Please be careful. There are 2 fierce hollows not far from here. They were once brave knights, my former escorts. Who would let such strong spirits be hollowed so? Heavens, is there nothing at all to be done?
We have found Reah of Tharaland, lost in the darkness. Her companions Vince and Nico have gone hollow just beyond here as they realize what the journey means for them. One day they will be Petrus, or they will be Reah, and they will have to make this journey again. Now as I sneak around here and try to separate the 2 Hollow Knights, let's talk about what Reah just said symbolically. Reah is Priscilla lost in the darkness of her existence, and that descent started when the Gravelord gave up part of his Lord's soul to her. Nito kicked her and her daughter Velka down into the pit as he tried to please and impress his new family. And in the end, this led to Velka going mad in the city of Astora. Here played by Nico, the one that hides his face and muffles his voice like a sinner. Vince is Gwendolyn, who now haunts Lordran as well, just like his sister, after having faced his own challenges caused by his fear of the night that approached because of his mother's compact with Gwyn. Both of Priscilla's children are lost in the dark as she sits frozen nearby. Who would let such strong spirits be hollowed so? Reah would, as she provides false hope in a world that is collapsing, knowing that the curse would come to take the others as well. This is why Patches despises her, as he fell for the lies of the Way of White once. Priscilla was responsible for her children's hollowing. She was the one who was meant to keep the world in order with her divine justice. But she neglected her duty when it became too hard, or she was bribed with promises of more power and a better life. Is there nothing to be done at all? Well, a Gravelord sword and a skull lantern helps a bit, though a Black Knight halberd would make things a lot easier. And so falls Vince and Nico, and fortunately in one go. I did not think that was going to happen.
You banished those 2 hollows, did you? It pains me to think of the trouble my failings have caused. I am certain that both Vince and Nico are grateful to you. Thank you so very much. Here, these belonged to them. You deserve them more than I.
And before we talk about that exchange, just note quickly out the back here, if we look down here, this is Lost Izalith. This is the capital of the Witch of Izalith and is a city of the east. So returning to that small exchange between Reah of Tharaland and the Chosen Undead, we see 2 things. Firstly, Priscilla's turning point. When she loses her children, she starts to realize her failings, and this is where she pulls away from the world, giving up on her role as the Queen of Lordran, and starts to reflect on herself and those she ruled over. Next, Reah gave us the replenishment spell, and that miracle will slowly restore HP over time. Why would the symbols of Velka and Gwendolyn possess such a spell? It is because Velka and Gwendolyn were both sources of life. They were both kindly mothers. And by Vince and Nico having this spell, it signifies that they will one day become those kindly mothers if they had survived. Their job is to encourage and push forward the valiant father, Reah of Tharaland. And here we have a new enemy, a stack of skeletons that are weak to fire. These monsters can drop white titanite chunks. Now this whole expedition is going too well, so let's press our luck a little bit and jump back and grab a piece that we missed over here. These creatures drop white titanite because they are the remains of the cleric knights of the Way of White, all stuck together by the dark. For countless years after the world collapsed and Lordran became a ruin, the cleric knights of Lordran would find martyrs and heap onto them the humanity they gathered from the undead hunts. Then send them in pilgrimage to the Land of Lords, where they would complete their vital mission of disposing of that dark and keeping the world turning and the kingdom of Tharaland safe from the curse. And now we are starting to see the mess Petrus has made. One of these martyrs, saturated with humanity, the ability to seek better ways, has not been disposed of. Instead, she has escaped and wondering what is to be done about it all.
Oh, you! Well, let's just calm down. Talk about things. I did you wrong, but I didn't mean it. These temptations, they can, well, overcome me. You know what I mean, don't you? Please, forgive me. You and me, we're jolly undead outcasts, aren't we? Oh, for heaven's sake, let's not mope about, eh? You're still alive. I've said I'm sorry. Wait, I know. Here, take this. It proves something, doesn't it?
And we can see why Patches is laughing at us. He extends a hand of friendship in hopes we have learned something from our time in the pit. And when we continue to refuse that friendship, he gives us the remains of a mother with child, as it is the perfect gift for an irredeemable monster. Trusty Patches was after our trinkets, but this is not our equipment. It is the souls that he seeks, to separate them from the sickness, humanity. The points of light we see scattered about are souls, petrified and safe. Trusty Patches is seeking atonement by gathering souls at the end of the world and attempting to do what he can to stop the cycle for a few select creatures. Symbolically, we are seeing Nito the Gravelord as something that is easy to forget about because Manus overshadows him later as Father of the Abyss. But Nito is the original Lord of Darkness, and so temptation overcomes him, and he loses himself as he does crazy things like lift Priscilla and Velka up to the station of gods. This is also why he did not think of the consequences when he allied himself with Sif and took Havel's family from him, blinded by his own greed to finally have his own family. In this exchange, we are also seeing Nito cornered in his domain by an army, leading him to give up Priscilla and Velka to a foolish revolutionary who was still a naive child. Is Nito, as he and his followers try to gather the children of Lordran, doing so selflessly, to save them from the pain of an endless cycle? Or is he motivated by his own vanity, a chance for him to be the center of the world, where everyone will be like him in his own image? Or perhaps it is both, or something else. That is an interpretation that you can make for yourself as we continue Velka's story. And here we have the last piece of new content for this episode, the giant skeleton dogs. Notice the skull. It is a human skull. The paws are hands. This is a summary of everything we've talked about so far. This creature was once a humanoid knight, weighed down by his duty and turned into a loyal guard dog.